The iconic Airbus A380 is said to have been undergoing a lot of changes, and that includes having two engines for this Airbus. Airbus made the Airbus 380, which is a huge wide-body plane. It's the only full-length double-deck jet airliner and the biggest passenger plane in the world. While talking about flying with two engines, a lot of people have various concerns. We've seen questions like, can the Airbus actually be redesigned to fly with two engines? Sure, but revamp is the understatement of the century. To make this happen, the artists would have to work very hard. The plane wouldn't fly the same way or perform as well as the present model. For the current A380 to be able to carry as much cargo and go as fast as it does now, it would need engines that are twice as strong as the ones it has now. The highest gross weight for takeoff would still be more than 1.1 million pounds. That means the plane will have to be 4 feet higher off the ground, have a completely new wing spar that can hold the weight of the engines, and have a major repair of the landing gear bulkhead and retraction system. That means the body has to be made all over again. That means a new tail on the back, so every skin strip, floor, and rib would have to be drawn over again. To put it another way, a brand new plane. But if the runway was long enough, the weather was good, and the airport was high enough, two engines running in balanced settings would be enough to get a light A380 up to flying speed. Since an empty A380 weighs less than half as much as a fully filled one, half the thrust would give it about the same acceleration. Also, at half the weight, you'll only need about 71% of the speed to get off the ground. It's so easy, except you won't have any room for another engine failure. Airbus won't have any data on how well you did, and you'll have to accept that your flying career is over. If the right and left engines were not adjusted, it would be very hard to control the plane at low speeds on the runway. Because the nose gear doesn't have much power and the rudder doesn't do much at low speeds, it would be hard or impossible to follow the center line of the runway if both engines were going on one side. You wouldn't get very far with only about 40,000 pounds of fuel if you cut it in half, but you could add a little more weight to the starting weight. Most people think it has to do with where the wings are, but it was planned that way because of how things went wrong. So if one engine breaks down, the other one has to be turned off. It could fly, but it would need a special track to take off. It has 4 engines, which is one of the most recognizable features to save time on the road and keep people safe. Oh, you won't believe this, but it's cheaper. What could make an engine fail? A failed engine could be caused by one or more of several things. The result is either a contained engine failure or an uncontained engine failure. When something goes wrong in the engine but everything stays inside the engine case, this is called a confined engine failure. Problems with the power source are an example of a failure where the engine is still running. On the other hand, an uncontained engine failure happens when one or more parts of the engine come loose. These things are much easier to see and could be scary for people who are sitting near the wing of an aeroplane. In the worst case, the whole engine could break apart and fall to the ground below. Let's look at why the Airbus 380 has 4 engines. When it was first made, the A340 was meant to get around the limits of twin-engine planes. With 4 engines, it could fly farther from a detour airport and even make long trips over water. But over the next few years, limits on planes with 2 engines were gradually eased. Quad-jet airliners like the Airbus 380 have 4 engines. If one engine fails, this gives them an edge over twin-engine planes. Engine failures can be contained or uncontained. Uncontained failures are more obvious and could cause parts of the plane to fall off. Even though an A380 can fly with just one engine, it's not a good idea because the plane's speed, drag, and altitude would drop, forcing the crew to either start up the other engines or find a good airport for an emergency landing. I'm pretty sure people would work hard to make the Airbus 380 fly with 2 engines because the Airbus itself has a lot of good things to offer. When people first saw the A380, they were shocked and airline leaders were happy. They were looking at a double-decker, wide-body, 4-engine passenger plane that was 40% bigger than the next biggest airliner, the Boeing 747-8, and could carry up to 853 all-economy passengers. International airports pushed hard to change their runways and gates to meet the needs of the huge A380. The link between 2 big airports completes a world circuit that would help support more business travel. One thing to think about was only having enough power to lift such a ship. For airports to be able to use the A380, it had to meet strict rules about noise and move quickly on the ground. Since most of the work was in the Middle East, the engine had to be able to handle both high heat and the damage that wind and sand can cause. Fuel consumption would be one of the most important ways to measure how well an engine works. Operating costs can be affected by millions of dollars by tiny changes in efficiency. Then there was the simple task of moving an engine to a place where it could be put together. Since there was only one plane that could take a fully built GP7200 from the engine maker to the assembly site, a cost-effective modular shipping system would have to be made. So what actually went wrong with the Airbus A380? The A380 was the biggest commercial plane ever made, and it was made to be better than Boeing 747. Passengers and pilots liked how comfortable and easy it was to fly, but airline finance departments were less impressed. During the 14 years that the plane was made, there was a lot of drama, including a costly rethink of its wings and more desperate attempts to sell more of the big plane and make it last longer. After the re-engineering method worked so well for the A320 family, they talked a lot about making even bigger versions and Neos. But Emirates canceled a large follow-up order that could have saved the program in the winter of 2018. After that, it was up to the departing CEO of Airbus, Tom Enders, to decide what would happen to the A380. It was clear that Airbus would never get back the roughly 25 billion euros or $30 billion it had spent over the years on R&D for the program. And since there were no new orders to keep production going, even at a slow pace, it was no longer possible. Since Concorde, Europe's most ambitious commercial plane project has been the 380. However, it was a huge failure and a great example of how management misread the market. In the weeks before the final arrival, Aviation Week show news talked about a number of insiders who told us their stories and shared their thoughts. Enders and John Leahy, who used to be the head of sales for Airbus, were among them. So was Nico Buchholz, who used to work for Airbus and later bought the plane for Lufthansa as the head of fleet planning. Some people think that maybe the program was saved, but if you look back in time, you can see that the industry started to worry about the A380's potential even before the first plane was delivered. Hopefully Airbus will see a good future ahead, and as the world keeps on evolving, we'll definitely see a lot of changes, and that will ease the process even more. That's it for today, guys, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Leave a like and comment down with your thoughts on this topic, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching.